This episode's made possible by Planful. Hello and welcome to episode 27 of Planning Aces. On today's show, we'll be featuring FP&A insights and commentary of three finance leaders, including CFO Tony Bohr of Blackbaud, CFO Michelle Hook of Petrillos, and CFO Stephen Cirillis of Potbelly. This is Jack Sweeney, your co-host, along with performance management guru Brett Knowles, who will serve as our resident thought leader as we seek to highlight the takeaways from our distinguished group of Planning Aces. We'll begin after this.
Hi, I'm Rowan Tonkin, Chief Marketing Officer at Planful, and we're a proud sponsor of CFO Thought Leader. At Planful, we're empowering teams just like yours to drive peak financial performance in every corner of your business. What sets Planful apart? We have purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. This means we can get you up and running within weeks, and it requires minimal IT involvement. So you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business in your key financial processes. Best of all, you can't outgrow us. We take the pain of growing away with an unmatched ability to scale with you. You have an endless runway with Planful. See why over 1,300 customers around the world choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com and see how you can make financial performance a team sport in your business.
Hi, it's Jack, and I'm here with Brett Knowles. Brett, how are you?
You managed to get your homework done yesterday, buddy?
I did. In fact, I went and found the exact clip, and I think we'll tee things off with that one today. So that was a great suggestion. Thank you for that. Just to clue the listener a little bit in on what we're talking about, often the excerpts that we share with you, we always look for what might be a complete thought. There are so many great comments and insights that are shared sometimes that are part of a much larger discussion. So what you need to do is find that comment, that standalone comment that really is impactful. Otherwise, the thought could be somewhat confused or lost.
My favorite quote from a movie, ironically, would be Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is, how I live my life. And there's this scene where John Candy and Steve Martin are in the hotel room. And you'll remember the scene because that's where Steve Martin says, well, I slept nice, my hand from between two pillows. And John Candy says those weren't pillows. But the line I like most is, John Candy's like me. He's going babble, babble, babble. Then Steve Martin eventually looks at him and goes, the problem with you is when you speak, there's supposed to be a message.
Oh, that is a great line. Well, I think you'll agree. We have three finance leaders, aka three planning aces, that deliver a message today and have substance to share with us. As always, I want to just begin by asking you, having reviewed the clips, about let's call it the bigger message that they together sort of deliver for us. What comes to mind?
They're focused on what is the skill set we need in FP&A. So we weren't talking about secret formulas. We weren't talking about planning horizons or the current cadence of business. But, what is the skill set of FP&A? And I think it's changing over time. I'll pick a random date. 10 years ago, FP&As were stick in your swim lane. It's only about financial planning and analysis. Whereas I think we're seeing the A of FP&A getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're leaning on our teams to provide way better insights about the strength of our strategies and our performance against plan. And it's taking skills that are different than the planning skills. So a simple example is for most corporations, it takes 16 weeks to cut a plan. And then we kind of forget the monitoring. We seem to be moving towards how do we become more agile? How do we shave off time on the planning side and use those resources instead on the analysis side? So I just, if it's a balance sheet between FP and A, I'm seeing the A increasing in importance and the planning part decreasing. And I think one of the reasons the planning part is decreasing is the uncertainty in the current business environment. So if you think of this zone of uncertainty, like we know precisely what's going to happen tomorrow, we're guessing what's happening a quarter from now. It's a real big guess a year from now. Well, those event horizons are compressing, where even tomorrow becomes a bit of a guess. The end of the quarter is a big guess, and we've got no clue as to end a year. So we can't plan more precisely because the world's too uncertain. Therefore, we have to analyze more precisely.
Do you think they share sort of a common view uh, of FP&A, or is it different in certain respects?
Each of them have a slightly different challenge, and they've solved it in a slightly different way. All three have solved them by providing better strength in their teams, but they've done so in a different approach. So I think our listeners need to listen to each of these three stories and pick which techniques make the most sense for their situation. You know, to me, the metaphor is again a bit like playing golf, right? At any hole, you've got choices on what your strategy is going to be on that hole. Are you going to go long over the water? Are you going to go around the water? What swing do you have today, and what tools do you have at your disposal? And all three have a different collection of tools at their disposal, and metaphorically a different swing. The competency they have. And I think all three of them express good course management, how they've chosen to play that hole, given what they've got to use.
Well, let's kick things off then with our first planning ace, who will be Tony Bohr, CFO of Blackbaud. Now, for those who might not know, Blackbaud is a SaaS software company that specializes in the not-for-profit sector. It serves foundations, educational institutions. It's very socially minded. Tony was with us on episode 930. Just a wonderful career journey that he shared with us. Blackbaud has grown in the last 10 years quite a bit through acquisition, as Tony will relate to us. But we'll play the clip and come back with Brett. Here's Tony Bohr.
It's different. I don't want to say substantially different, but it's significantly different than it was org structure wise, certainly. So we had a big effort to gain significant efficiencies and productivity within my finance and accounting org. So many years ago, we embarked on this effort to optimize our finance and accounting team. When we did peer comparisons, we were probably close to double the number of people and resources that our peers had for the same size company. Now, part of it, our company is very complex. We've done lots of acquisitions. We had not consolidated those, so we were more of a conglomerate. And so we've moved to shared service centers of excellence. We've consolidated operations on all those old acquisitions. So now we have this, this parental advantage all centralized in the back office. We've done that for HR. We've done that for IT. We've done it for finance and accounting. So we did it for the entirety of the business. And so huge efficiencies and gains. But we cut our finance and accounting staff by roughly half. And the business is now 3 times the size. Now we've simplified and standardized and automated and put in best of breed solutions. And so that gives you a sense of, think about how much change that is to run a business 3 times as big with half as many people. So that's why I say that how we're structured is much different because of all the consolidation. We used to have multiple what we called CFOs because we had CFOs for each of the divisions. We no longer have that any longer. FP&A is all central. We've consolidated it where we have experts on renewals and that side of thing and churn. And then we have experts on the booking side that manage all the bookings with all the sales teams. And so we've kind of aligned more with specific skill sets, which is a change, again, how we're organized. A lot of what they manage is the same. The overall business hasn't changed. But how we address that now that it's consolidated and I think we have better players. I certainly had to upskill the team from when I came on board. Had a lot of folks that were here pre-IPO. And not necessarily the right talent for the size of org that the company had grown into or the size of the business. And so we had to upskill a team. I always like to think about it too. I tell my folks, unlike the NFL, all my hires can be first round draft picks, right? I'm not limited and I don't have to have a second and third. So I can get the best of the best. It's just, can you find them, right? And entice them to come to the company. And the nice thing about us is we have a tremendous amount of folks apply for our openings because of the space, right? We're a tech company, software space, well-known, and do all of this great stuff, in the social impact space. And so we typically never have a shortage of applicants for our roles, which is nice.
One last question before we move to our finance strategic moment question. Okay, so some of your members of your FP&A team are down the hall in a conference room, and Tony swings open the door. What do they think Tony's going to ask for? What is it that they think? How are they going to respond to you?
Well, if it were today, I know exactly what it'd be, which is the latest version of our long-range model. So we're getting ready to have a strategic offsite with the leadership team next week, where we're going to talk about, the next 7 years and our plans and our go-to-market and
how often do those happen? How often?
Typically at least once a year. Yeah. So we got a really good cadence that we go through every year. We just had an all-day meeting yesterday on the long-range plan where each of the different parts of the business come and give their updated long-range plans. We'll move into annual operating plan cycle next. So we do kind of this strategic review of our long-range plans. How has that changed? Then we move into the AOPs, work through all the AOPs, and that's kind of investment requests come out of those. And that really, what we agree to do or not do in the AOPs is really what drives the budget, right? And so then we take those AOP output from those and run right into the budget cycle. Now, the interesting thing about our budget cycle over the years, we now forecast out 24 months on a rolling basis. And we do that every quarter. And so our budget is actually pretty easy to do because I've already got a forecast 24 months out in advance. And we try to ensure those are close to the pin as possible. And so they largely are the budget, except for tweaks we might make for investment decisions.
All right. Well, there's a nice overview from Tony Bohr, nice overview and great snapshot of his mindset as far as finance and retooling finance. Brett, what did you make of what Tony shared?
Well, so I thought what was interesting about Tony is he suffers from what we see many organizations have these days, and that is the result of a bunch of acquisitions and ending up with a mixed bag of resources. In his case, he typified that by just having, duplication, triplication of resources doing the same thing, and that need to simplify. But within that, you can understand where not only do I have duplicate people, like different 3 or 4 people doing the same activity based on 3 or 4 acquisitions, but they're probably doing it in 3 or 4 different ways as well. And none is necessarily right or wrong, but when you have it done 3 different ways, you begin to get inefficiencies as opposed to agreeing on one standard approach. Now, he didn't focus too much on the skill set, but I think his symptom, the head count that he talked about, was indicative of that overall problem. In fact, if you listen to him, he talked about reducing the head count and then needing to upskill the team. So it's a bit of a Gordian knot about whether you upskill the current team and then resize and upskill. I truly liked his comment, like that when he said, unlike the NFL, he can make sure every one of his picks is first round. And so it talks about a new approach. Obviously, he was there for some time during those acquisitions, and he did nothing to simplify FP&A. Now he's chosen to do it. He's taken on head on. I'm changing the head count. I'm simplifying the processes. I'm upskilling the team. I'm making sure I'm picking top-notch people. So something's happened that's triggered him to take a fresh look at FP&A and stop thinking about it as just an administrative back office thing and begin thinking of it as a strategic tool for the business.
Yes. And at the same time, when it comes to M&A and the back office systems, he used this interesting phrase. I don't know if you caught it. He said parental advantage, which, as I understand it, and he does explain the term in our original episode, but it speaks to being the acquiring company and how having standardized on certain platforms provides the acquiring company with a parental advantage.
Yeah, I like that. I've never heard that phrase before, but I like the approach where we agree on what is going to be our standard methodology and then gravitate things towards that. One of the dilemmas that we're seeing, and it's a very current issue, is what I call the shiny object. We're seeing the shiny object, which some people might think of as AI or Chat GPT, and everyone's going, gosh, we need to migrate our systems towards that. And of course, the cost to shift systems is terrific. Not only the financial cost, but teaching people how to use the new tools and so on. On the other hand, with AI, the benefit is so huge that you just need to do it. Companies like Workday are going to come up with their AI tool inside of 18 months. Is it worth shifting now, or do you want to wait 18 months? But regardless, sticking to that one core process, I think, is critical for any organization, especially one like this that's doing acquisitions. What does that mean? It means it's easier to move people from one business unit to another. It's easier to consolidate. It's actually easier to make the acquisition decision because I can take a look at whatever system the target is currently using and figure out how much effort and cost it's going to be to transfer them over. Because we often forget, we think we're buying a book of business, we're buying new tools, we're buying a customer list, and we forget about the back office and the cost of integrating things like FP&A. So it's an interesting approach to take a hard stand on what's the process and then figure out how to do the acquisition around that.
Well, Brett, I thought it would be interesting to feature two planning aces from the same sector, which is the restaurant sector. And that's Michelle Hook of Portillo's, CFO of Portillo's, and Stephen Cirulis, CFO of Potbelly's. Actually, two restaurants rooted in the Midwest, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to begin with Michelle, who, was quite dynamic on our recent episode. She's only one or two episodes back now for us. So if you haven't caught it, you really would like to listen to Michelle Hook, CFO of Portillo's.
We had a strong FP&A team when I joined. The work needed to be done on more of the accounting, financial reporting side. But the folks that we had in FP&A were very strong, and they remain very strong. They needed outside of myself, right? I brought in a new VP of FP&A, and Kyle joined us over a year ago, and he's been great. But one of the things that, I aligned with Kyle on early on is how I viewed FP&A, which is, there's an aspect of FP&A, which I'll call it operational FP&A, Jack, and that's the FP&A that supports the business. I'm going to work with, the restaurant operators. I'm going to work with my HR team, supply chain, whatever parts of the business, I'm going to work with you on your business needs. And then there's corporate FP&A, right? Corporate FP&A is Michelle needs board materials. I need prep for the quarterly earnings calls. We're doing a development day next week, right, in Dallas. I need some materials prep for that. I need analysis done for that, right? That's what I would call more corporate FP&A. And so, Kyle has really worked to align his resources on FP&A to those different work streams, and then really making sure that our business partners, again, whether it's on the ops side, the HR side, IT, have a business partner to work with on the FP&A team that knows their business that they can go to when they have questions or need some analysis done. So that's how I view the world. Again, it's a small, lean, but powerful team. They get a lot done. We're just talking about the restaurant performance overall, but more importantly, how we were working. And then that led into how we were building our restaurants, right? The size of the restaurants. And from my lens, yes, Portillo's does fantastic AUVs, but I always, and this was just Michelle's personal lens, I always thought that there were some aspects of our restaurants that were overbuilt. And so I came from Domino's, right, which is a lens of they didn't have these big dining rooms, and most of their business, they had a heavy digital business. Portillo's business is 20% digital. And so for me, post-COVID, our dine-in business went from 50% to about 35%. So there was an aspect of me that as we were having these conversations, I thought to myself, I think we're overbuilding our restaurants. I think as where the puck's going is what we need to think about, because I think that dynamic isn't going to change. So our CEO said, great, Michelle, you and our head of marketing are going to lead the project, and we're going to call it Restaurant of the Future, and you guys are going to go figure that out. So for the last year and a half, we've been figuring that out, and it's been an awesome project. It's been very cross-functional. This isn't like a finance person's comfort zone, but I think one of the things that Michael, our CEO, realized is, it wasn't something where I had something in my head that it needed to be that way, right? I wasn't an operational person, so I take it very much with a data-driven lens. We did time and motion studies in our restaurants, and we spent a lot of time looking at those type of aspects, gathering a lot of data, looking at the conveyance in the kitchen and all those things. And yeah, we're, lo and behold, in the back half of 2024, we're going to build a much smaller restaurant. And it's going to have not only benefits on the cost side and the return side for investors, but on the team members' end, it's going to be easier for them to work and convey.
Okay, Michelle Hook. You might have noticed there are two clips really that I put together there from our conversation with Michelle, the latter being the one about the restaurant of the future. But originally I engaged her to tell us about M&A, what she found when she first arrived, and that's where she goes into the detail there about that key hire she makes and what have you.
She got that done and dusted. And now she's been invited to the big table about strategy. So what's interesting is FP&A is often reactive. The executive committee sets the strategy, and FP&A has to figure out what does the plan look like that goes behind it. And what we know is that often causes a disconnect. The strategy pushes one direction, the budget doesn't support it, and we have this tension. Whereas now that she's part of that process, and the key part, we're going to see much better integration between the two. And so this is sort of an extension from what we heard from Tony. Tony was talking about, how do we integrate the planning process itself across these different investments. She's talking about how do we integrate planning into other processes like the strategic planning process. Inside of FP&A, she took a second step, which I thought was interesting. To kind of divide into two groups: operational, those people that support, the departments and so on, and corporate, which is what's supporting board communications and calls and special meetings and so forth, and describes that as sort of a separate work stream. What does that imply? Again, if we build in what we heard from Tony, a different set of tools and processes and competencies. I've got one set of tools and competencies for operational support, a different set for this corporate thing. She didn't mention it, but in that corporate thing, I'm seeing strategy as part of that bailiwick of responsibilities. And so that's a distinction I haven't seen before, separation between more tactical operational support, she calls it, and more strategic, that corporate support, she calls it. Right, better integration of planning with the different departmental thoughts. And that's a powerful solution because, again, the average is 16 weeks to develop a plan. Why is it 16 weeks? Because corporate sets something and sends it off to departments. Departments respond to that in a month or so, and they come back in a very eclectic way. So now corporate has to realign them again, send it back down. And we have, on average, 4 iterations back and forth before we sort out the plan. Michelle solved that problem by building the plans in an integrated fashion so that we don't have this back and forth. So I think we're going to see 2 things. One is better plans, but secondly, a significant reduction in elapsed time to get to the plan. And that becomes super important, again, in the confusing market that we're in, or in her case, a fairly major strategic realignment, right? She's talking about smaller dining in, obviously more digital, more takeout food. That's a major change in the cost footprint in terms of the hiring, the marketing, all those other sorts of things. And it's going to take them several iterations to get it right. And if it takes you 16 weeks every time you need to cut a new plan, your learning cycles are pretty darn slow. If she can compress that through that integration, we now have faster learning cycles, we're more agile. And as we learn our way to that new footprint, we can adapt faster and better.
So, given what Tony has shared and Michelle has shared, if the two met, what would they likely have a conversation about?
It's about course management. We can see that Tony had one situation, a bunch of acquisitions. We needed to amalgamate and merge things together. Michelle has a different issue where she's trying to become more strategic and needs to change the competency she has in FP&A around that. So again, your listeners may be more like Tony, they may be more like Michelle, they may be a mix between the two. And so these are lessons about how to deal with your particular situation.
Okay, we'll jump to our next planning ace, who is Steven Cirulis, CFO of Potbelly. Now, what makes CFO Cirulis quite interesting to feature here is the fact that he really came up the ranks as a strategy executive. He was a top strategy executive at McDonald's for 5 years. And from there, he stepped into a top strategy role at Panera before being recruited over to Potbelly as a CFO, which is interesting as well. He shares that on his episode, another don't miss episode for us. But right now, Steven Cirulis, CFO of Potbelly.
Finance has historically been a reporting-based kind of function, right? We'll tell you what happened, and we'll do it with accuracy, and we'll do it with timeliness. But more and more, and particularly given my background in strategy, finance needs to be forward-looking, right? Tell us what the risks are, tell us what the opportunities are, tell us where we think things are going. And in order to do that, a lot of the sort of mundane reporting tasks can be, I think, assisted greatly with AI. And then similarly, and we've got some of our cloud-based platforms have AI components for forecasting, right? And those are the kinds of things that we're going to start to take more advantage of. Because, like I said, I believe that this business can punch above its weight by leveraging data. I also hold the title of Chief Strategy Officer, but I don't have a budget to go build a strategy team. So the way I've structured my FP&A team is I've got people who are specialists, to support our function. So I've got FP&A specialists focused on marketing, another one focused on development and real estate, another one focused on operations, right, and then core kind of corporate FP&A. Because I don't have a strategy team, the way my philosophy is, I need to hire the best available athletes. They will have a major, right? That's the kind of function they face off against. And they will have a minor, which is whatever kind of strategic work that we have going on. So they have to be smart, flexible. And then I love telling this to people. I said, look, for a business our size, to punch above our weight, we have to be better than the next guy at analytics and data. And fortunately, there's excellent solutions out there now that are cloud-based. And 10 years ago, we never would have had access to that kind of firepower. And I'm also a big believer in statistical analysis and applying that to finance, right? And so I've got a team that's able to work both sides of those things in order to really, I think, extract and identify opportunities that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to find. So we're still scrappy, we're still lean, but we're running on all cylinders now, which is really exciting.
Well, Steven Cerulis, and I don't think I gave the number before, is episode 928 and CFO Thought Leader. So, Brett, what did you make of what Steven shared with us?
Well, I liked his approach of focusing in what are the core processes that FP&A has to be good at. What we often see is the FP&A team gets pulled in a million different directions, and they kind of lose that core competency. So I like the fact that he's figured out what are those core processes, similar to what Tony did in saying we're going to focus on Workday, but what are the core processes and methodologies that we use? And I liked his comments that we must also get involved in strategy, like we heard from Michelle. So I'm seeing Steven as kind of like a mix between the two of what Tony shared with us and what Michelle around her situation. His add-on, I thought, was that the skill set he's looking at is needing people that are great at stats. Now, that's back to my story of the A is getting more important, the analysis, and that's all statistics. And understanding whether what we're seeing is a major deviation or a minor deviation, and how to interpret that, what are the causal effects and so on, and his focus on numbers. And to a certain extent, that's getting back to the core of what FP&A does. But what we've seen in other organizations is the FP&A is more reactive. We're just saying, given the plan, here are what the numbers need to look at. Whereas in this case, he's describing the need to do stats, which is giving feedback to those plans on do they make sense based on the history and a predicted future.
It might be worth mentioning, Brett, that Michelle Hook as well as Steven Cerulis both stepped into these CFO roles during COVID. It was only 2020, I believe. And it influenced, I think, in a lot of ways, how they were willing to sort of step up and become more of a change agent, or we have to do things differently or what have you. Anyway, I just think that's evident as well as from both of our discussions with them.
Well, I think, like we talked about in our introduction, is there's a lot of, it's a very turbulent business environment, right? And turbulence is defined by what are the things your organization is getting hit with and how big are they? So in minor turbulence, you just do your seatbelt and brace yourself. In major turbulence, maybe I've got to figure out how to roll with that wave, etc. So COVID was definitely one of those big waves. What Steven talked about was AI, right? He's talked about how FP&A, his words, have to punch above their weight. In other words, how can we have more intelligence than merely the headcount or the resources I've got at my disposal? And AI is obviously that multiplier. Well, AI is another one of those seismic events that's going to change how we do FP&A. I think of the standard planning process where the leader, the department leader, the CEO meets up with his leadership team to develop the new plan. And as I talk to the leadership team, I've got, let's say, 10 people on the team. They've all got 30 years of experience. They got 300 years of experience, assuming everyone can remember all 30 years of their career. That's a pretty deep pool, 300 years. Or I can go to an AI tool and I'm accessing 300,000 years of experience. And I'm accessing experience from same businesses, same market, different markets, and so forth. I have way more depth in my analysis than I ever had before. Now, it's AI becomes another player at the table, no different than someone else. You don't execute what AI says, but there's a bunch of new ideas that you didn't think about, and we can get there much faster. So my model of taking 16 weeks for the planning cycle, I can go to AI and compress that by probably a quarter just because I get faster access to that feedback. And so that's another major event. And Stephen's describing how Potbelly's responding to that and what his expectation is, punching above our weight. So I think the FP&A world is never going to be the same again. If we take a look at recent events with, new powerful tools, layers like AI on top of it, the need for us to have a tighter connection between strategy and execution, I think that's putting a lot of pressure on FP&A to change. And I think all three of our thought leaders from this episode have told us how they're responding to those external pressures.
Wow, that sums things up nicely for us. So you put a bow on it for us right there.
I'm sorry, I rushed to the conclusion of the show before we got there.
No, I don't think we could have come up with a better ending. So thank you, Brett Knowles, as always. And permit me to thank our planning aces this episode. If you haven't heard our episodes with Michelle Hook, Steven Cerulis, or Tony Bohr, please go visit our archive. They'll pop right up. You just type in their names. But for Planning Aces, this is Jack Sweeney. Thank you, as always, for joining us and listening.